Well, it's us. Oh, look, it's you, the champions. Yes, that would be the Kansas City Chiefs winning the Super Bowl.
Yeah,
I wonder,
yeah.
do you know any? Do you know anybody that actually went to the Super Bowl?
Let me think about that. Maybe.
Kat was like one of the lucky ones. So let's let everybody know where you actually live right now. Tell everybody where you live.
Yeah, I'm in Fort Lauderdale, Florida now. So I used to live here years ago, and I moved away several times and did multiple things, and now I'm back, especially this time of year, which is fantastic down here.
Yeah,
So I'm in paradise,
and
as they say.
you're gigging down there. Kat sings, as many of
Yeah.
you know, and she's been a professional singer pretty much her whole life. So you're
Yes.
singing down there.
Yeah, I'm having a blast. There's piano bars and all that kind of stuff. And it's really great down here.
Yeah.
So I'm loving it. But I'm also loving working on this project with you, Ricky. This has just been an amazing creative journey. We have been working on not only the story, but Ricky's been designing fabrics and patterns. And it's going to maybe morph, we hope, into music for a score for behind the book, and then of course, as you do, Pixar will pick it up,
Yeah,
and it'll be a massive
I'm
move.
just putting it out there. Everybody send good vibes to Pixar, Disney, or somebody because this is going to be a great, great book for the screen. And I will say that yes, we are trying to do music for like an audio thing. We're looking at doing
Right?
the quilt pattern book so that people can make the Lizzy Albright quilt. And I'm
Yep.
looking down the road to all kinds of crazy stuff that will spin off, but also really in the way of teaching, like I said, kids to be involved in sewing. And oh, I see Murphy back there, by the way. He's reasoning over. There's Murphy. Yeah, that's Murphy. Look at him. So yeah, but spinning off to all kinds of things, and so I think let's just get into this next chapter. Obviously, there's been a goose pop into the story, and you know by the front
Yeah.
cover of the book, which let me show everybody once again. The front cover of the book looks like this, and with the front cover of the book, you know that there's going to be a goose in this story. But Lizzy is very much a part of the story, and it is still Christmas Eve. It is still her 10th birthday, but they have left Overland Park, Kansas. If you would like to find where the old Woolsworth department store is, it is a real place. It exists. So all those fun
Yep.
things for those of you that live in that area, certainly you get to see all that. Now, before we jump into the chapter, because you are singing, people need to find you on Facebook, Kat Bowser, and they can find out then
Yep.
where you're singing and so forth if they're in that area. So that's great.
Of
So a
course.
little plug about that. Now, everybody, chapter 3. Chapter 3. Are we there yet? Asked Lizzy as she closed the back door. The station wagon was still parked in the driveway. Very funny, Doug said snarkily. Lizzy thought it would be funny to get a jump start on the typical travel silliness, but the timing of her joke was off and it didn't elicit the expected result from her brothers. Even so, she had not been ignored. Mrs. Albright, while placing 2 packets of juicy fruit chewing gum and a fresh box of Kleenex in the glove box, replied in a sing-songy lilt, "No, we're not there yet." She pulled down the sun visor and looked into the little mirror to make sure her hair was still in place. She puckered and pursed her lips, checking to see if she might need to freshen up her lipstick. Then she ran her tongue across her upper teeth, making sure there was no lipstick on them. "Off like a herd of turtles in a sea of peanut butter," Mr. Albright said as he pulled out of the driveway. This was a phrase that none of the children had heard before, and it took a few seconds to sink in. One by one, the light bulbs went off, and they each smiled, chuckled, and giggled when they realized that turtles in a sea of peanut butter would certainly not be going anywhere very fast. "I thought it was off like a dirty shirt," said Lizzy. "That works too," said Mr. Albright, peering into the rearview mirror. "I should say it works on those occasions when we're going lickety-split, but that wasn't the case today, was it?" The question was rhetorical, and nobody said anything in reply. He clicked on the left blinker and turned onto West 99th Street. "I like it," Alan laughed. Off like a herd of turtles in a sea of peanut butter. Off like a dirty shirt, replied Doug. Off like a... Lizzy was thinking hard, trying to make something up fast. She was gazing out through the back window when she spotted a lone goose off in the distance. It seemed to be traveling in the same direction they were. She froze with curiosity. Was this the same goose she had seen earlier? Was he really following them? And that's when she shouted, "Off like a southbound goose!" "Good one, Lizzy," replied Mrs. Albright. They puttered away, winding along to the main highway. Even though it was early afternoon, they each took turns pointing out the various holiday decorations along the way. Traffic was light, and a blanket of quietness fell over the car. The only thing to be heard was the humming of the engine and the gentle whir of the tires rolling on pavement. They had barely crossed Overland Park city limits when Lizzy broke the silence. "Are we there yet?" She giggled under her breath, knowing that this time the question would get a better reaction. "Are we there yet? Are we there yet?" Alan repeated. He mimicked Lizzy by using a whining falsetto. Lizzy smiled. "I'm cold," exclaimed Doug. The temperature outside had dropped 20 degrees in a matter of minutes. The heater wasn't keeping the entire car toasty warm. Mr. Albright reached over and pointed the vents up and turned the fan to high in an attempt to push the warm air up and over into the back of the station wagon. "Is that better?" "Uh-huh." "Uh-huh?" Mr. Albright asked. Doug changed his response. "Yes, thank you," he said, this time choosing words that he knew to be more appropriate. Growing up in the Midwest, yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, and a plethora of variations on thank you and please were required when speaking to any adult, parents, or otherwise. "I'm hot," Alan said 2 minutes later. Although he wasn't really hot, he knew by saying so that it would annoy Doug. "Hot? You can't be hot," Doug said. "It's 38 degrees outside." "And falling," added Mr. Albright. Doug grabbed his coat that had been tucked next to him. He wrapped it around himself as if he were putting a cape on backwards. While doing this, he exaggerated his motions, expecting that his overacting would help to sell his point. "I'm kinda hungry," mumbled Alan. Another, "Are we there yet?" came from the back seat. The car interrupted in unison. "No, we are not there yet." Lizzy smiled again. In fact, nobody was hot, or cold, or hungry, and everyone knew they were not there yet. Still, the Albrights had their family rituals, and this particular one helped them to pass the time. The station wagon finally reached the main highway, turned left, and headed south. Mr. Albright reached over and switched on the radio just as Burl Ives was beginning to sing, "Have a Holly Jolly Christmas." They all joined in singing along. The song ended and the radio announcer said in a lively and robust voice, "It's not too late for you to have your own holly jolly Christmas. The Christmas tree lot located by the Woolworths department store on the corner of Troost and Linwood has a few trees left for any of you Scrooges out there who just might have a change of heart today. Fresh Scotch pines along with noble and Fraser firs are still available, as well as my personal favorite, the blue spruce. Everything is 75% off until the lot closes at 10 p.m. tonight." "I want to be Scrooge," Doug said. "You can't be Scrooge," exclaimed Lizzy. "You like Christmas. Mr. Scrooge hated Christmas. He thought it was a humbug." "Maybe I do like Christmas, but I still like the idea of being a Scrooge." Alan looked directly at Doug. He paused for just a second and then said in his grittiest voice, "Scrooge." Doug snickered, jutted his jaw, and said, "Scrooge," turning the word into 2 syllables with the rouge pitching upward like the howling of a wolf. Everyone laughed at the new variation. "Scrooge," Mrs. Albright echoed. Mr. Albright laughed and then gave the new variation a try. "Scrooge." Soon everyone was howling, "Scrooge, Scrooge." Eventually the laughter died down. Just when it seemed that everyone had wafted into their own thoughts, Lizzy let loose another "Scrooge," and the car once again erupted with laughter. Although they didn't know it at the time, this new variation of Scrooge would become an Albright family tradition. They began driving through the countryside. They played a couple of short-lived road trip games and intermittently sang along with the Christmas songs on the radio. As usual, it wasn't long before everyone migrated to their own dream worlds. Mr. and Mrs. Albright spoke softly about some recent PTA issues. The kids put in their earpieces and turned on their transistor radios. Soon, the signals from their favorite FM stations were too weak, and only AM stations featuring farm reports, country music, and religious sermons were getting through. Eventually, the din of the road hypnotized their senses anyway, and daydreams and drowsiness won out over attentiveness, radios, and games. They shut their eyes, and their heads nodded. "Guess where we are?" asked Mrs. Albright. Nobody answered. Mrs. Albright looked back to see Doug and Alan with their eyes closed. She couldn't tell if they were listening to their transistor radios or if they were asleep. Lizzy was surely laying down, as no part of her could be seen from the front. Mrs. Albright reached back and tapped Alan on the knee. "Are you awake? Guess where we are," she said louder. Alan opened his eyes and looked out. "All right, Iola! Are we stopping at Whipple's?" Lizzy popped her head up over the rear seat and chimed in. "Are we?" The small town of Iola was situated halfway along the Albrights' route from Overland Park to Cordelia and sat at the intersection of two well-traveled state roads. While the Iola-Portland Cement Company may have been the town's biggest employer, the most famous thing in Iola for those passing by was Whipple's Cafe. The cafe was an A-framed building with a red roof that stood on the corner of the two main crossroads. They were famous for their chicken fried steak platter, and they had delicious burgers and fries. They had a huge assortment of ice cream, milkshakes, and malts. To Lizzy, reading the list of ice cream sundae toppings was like going through the nail polish and lipstick colors in the Avon catalog. It was hard to choose. Although she wasn't allowed to wear makeup yet, she certainly anticipated the day when she could. Normally, the Albrights would make Whipple's Cafe a proper lunch stop, and Lizzy would order a burger with onion rings. But because they ate lunch before they left, and Granny's Christmas Eve dinner was fast approaching, this stop would serve as a bathroom break and an opportunity for sweet treats of some kind. Even though it was cold outside, everyone in the family ordered an ice cream cone, except Lizzy, of course. "I'll have a banana split with chocolate ice cream, nuts, whipped cream, and 2 cherries on top," she ordered excitedly. "Please put 2 spoons on that," knowing that Lizzy would not be able to devour a full banana split on her own. After about 20 minutes, Mrs. Albright announced it was time to move along. "Everyone to the restrooms, whether you need to or not," Mr. Albright began. "And wash your hands," Mrs. Albright interjected, "and then we'll get back on the road." "But I'm not done with my banana split," Lizzy whined. "Here, I'll help," Doug said, as he grabbed a cherry off Lizzy's plate and shoved it in his mouth. "Mom!" Lizzy cried to her mother. "Douglas, apologize to your sister," Mrs. Albright said firmly. Doug and Lizzy knew that if their full first names were spoken, it was serious business. Alan didn't have a shorter nickname, but he still knew when he was on the brink of being in trouble. If their first and middle names were used, it was time to quickly rethink all words and actions. When it came to discipline in the Albright home, there was one thing all 3 kids knew for certain. When their first, middle, and last names were used, they were in serious trouble. They knew with certainty that a private discussion was forthcoming and that some form of punishment, like not getting dessert or losing television privileges for a week, was about to ensue. "She was taking too long and," Doug protested. "Douglas Bryan," Mrs. Albright interrupted with a more serious tone. He realized he was heading toward the all 3 names scenario and wisely decided to cease his defense. "Sorry, Lizzy," Doug begrudgingly said with no further prompting. "It's okay. I sort of figured you would do that anyway, which is why I ordered 2 cherries." Lizzy shrugged it off and went on as if she didn't care, but she was a little upset. Mr. Albright looked each child directly in the eye, one at a time. He didn't say a word, but his message was clear. Then he announced, "Okay, kids, wash up and get back in the car." Looking towards Mrs. Albright, he said, "Maggie, I'll call your mother to let her know what time to expect us." Mr. Albright went to the payphone, which was located near the entrance, and dropped a quarter into the slot. "Operator, yes, I would like to make a call." The antics of kids in a car. Now, I had a sister, so there was just two of us, but you had two brothers, so it must have been crazy when you were on a trip.
Oh, it totally was. And it was all the time. Are we there yet? I'm hot. I'm cold. I have to go to the bathroom. I mean, it was just constant. And we were trying to always think of games to entertain ourselves the whole way down so that we wouldn't drive our father crazy.
That's great. And I love the music they're listening to. I love all this, the stuff that's happening here. Obviously, a goose, we don't know if it's the goose, but there is a goose that is obviously coming back into the story every now and then. And then I think about the whole trip to Whipple's. Now, Whipple's is it's Iola, right?
Iola exists. Iola really exists. Yeah.
Yes, and
that was kind of the halfway point for us traveling to Grandma's house.
So Cordelia, Kansas is a fictitious place, but I want to just kind of rehash this a little bit. Well, no, let's stop at Iola. I'm going to stop at Iola, and then I'm going to go to Cordelia. I did some research on Iola and found out that their concrete factory, that was a huge, big thing.
Oh, yeah.
So I put that in there, and like many little crossroad towns, they would have a cafe, or I'll even say Dairy Queen or something like that. So we created this little Whipple's place to be that, where this tragic episode happens with Doug stealing that cherry off of her banana split. That just should never have happened. You must have had some really big brother something from your family.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. We were always doing pranks on each other, It was just entertainment, I guess, for the time. But, it was all in fun and games. But it was always annoying, too.
Yeah. So there's a lot of this story that I researched in the backstory. When I say researched, I almost made it up, because the quilt that's going to come along in the story, I needed to know the date of the quilt. More than anything, I needed to know when was this quilt made and how old was Granny when she made the quilt. So I had to start doing some dates. And when would this, if Lizzie's 10, how old would her mother be? And what age would her mother have been when she was born? And how old is Granny? And how old would she have been when Lizzie's mother Maggie was born? And all of those things. So as I kept going back, all the way to the Civil War. And some things that are not in this book that I can tell everybody is that Lizzie's great-great-grandfather, who is Malcolm McHale, we have him being a general in the Civil War, not in the story, in my synopsis of him. And he had been previously married, but his wife died of scarlet fever in one of the outbreaks in Frederick, Maryland. Now, there really was an outbreak. His wife is, of course, fictitious. He's fictitious. But I have him coming to Kansas after being a general in the Civil War. He's in his early 30s. He goes to work for Levi Parsons. And Levi Parsons is a real historical person. And the name Parsons, Kansas, is named after Levi. And he was kind of the big mover and shaker of the Katy, Texas, Missouri Railroad, which many of you, if you even know the Katy Trail, the old Katy Railroad, that is what that is. So Mr. McHale became vice president fictitiously of this. And then his son, he marries Levi Parsons' daughter, fictitious, and her name is Cordelia. And whenever he has kids and his kid gets rich in the oil boom, they got money. They got the golden age money that was big back in the days of the Astors and the Rockefellers and all of that, big money. So he ends up marrying and going down and forming this town
called Cordelia, Kansas. It's a fictitious place, but if you threw a dart at the map, you might be able to find it. And so I think it's fun that they're going to go down to Cordelia, and it's all kind of based on fiction, but there's a little bit of historic fact that's not even in the story that you just got privy to just then. And Kat, I know I've been blabbing, but one of my favorite things is the very end of this chapter. Whenever Mr. Albright goes, Mr. Albright went to the payphone, which was located near the front entrance, and he dropped a quarter in the slot. Okay. Oh my God. Yeah. Is there even going to be an 8, 9, or 10-year-old on the planet that knows that we dropped quarters in the phone?
No. Well, and that's when they have to go to all of the grandmas and go, what is he talking about?
That's right. Tell me more about the time you used a payphone. Operator, I would like to reverse the charges. Can I make a collect call, please?
Collect call. Exactly.
Oh, yeah. So there's one. If you're listening to this with a kid, explain to them about a collect call. That'd be great.
Oh, my gosh, for real.
All right. Well, this has been fun. And I'm excited about chapter 4 because, of course, he did pick up the phone and he does call Granny. So we're going to get to meet Granny in the next chapter.
Yay.
Yay. All right. We'll see you, everybody.